Hello everybody, welcome along to this video. It's Mr. Johnson teaches Macbeth, and I'll be focusing on to do with the context here, the great chain of being and the divine right of kings. They're two ideas, two what you would call concepts that really can change the way that you look at the play and the message of the play as well, because one thing you really need to be confident in talking about is what Shakespeare was trying to say, what he was trying to teach us or show us, his audience, through Macbeth and through what happens in the play. So just a quick reminder, Macbeth is of course part of your GCSE English literature, and it's paper 1 section A, making it the first question you'll answer for your English GCSEs. So it's absolutely important to be really confident with it. And talking about it, AO3 is the assessment objective you are marked on, and it's to do with the context of the play. And basically what that means is, as I've put in the yellow box there, you need to show an understanding of how the time and events of 1606 affect how the audience viewed it. 1606 is the year that we know the play was first performed, and the theatre in the background of that photo there, that is the Globe Theatre, or a reconstruction of the Globe Theatre. But an audience watching it then would be very different to an audience watching it now. Shakespeare didn't write it for us now, although some of the themes are true. So anyway, you just need to make sure that whenever you're using context, it's not just about dumping it in there on its own paragraph. You're trying to weave it in. You're trying to sort of feed it into the ideas you've already got, or link it to the ideas that you're already writing about. And that is how you will gain higher marks. So just wanted to start with this picture then. We absolutely need to be thinking about religion here. This is a time where people were all religious, I think it's fair to say, and in Britain it was predominantly forms of Christianity, and I won't go into that too much, but absolutely let's set the scene here. When I say you, I'm talking about the audience at the time, so putting you into their shoes, and I say you would have grown up attending church at least every Sunday. So at least once a week you are going into buildings like this, maybe smaller versions of it, and you would have been hearing all about God's teachings and the stories from the Bible regularly. And by the time you reached adulthood, you would have heard those stories, heard them many, many times. And therefore they'd be really familiar to you. They would lead your life and lead the decisions you are making, which is that last bullet point there. These teachings would dictate your daily life, like guide it, and guide you between right and wrong. The decisions you make would be about being a good Christian because, as I should have maybe written on the screen there, ultimately it's about you wanting to get yourself into heaven, because you would have heard about heaven for years and years as growing up, not end up in hell through doing the wrong things, committing sins, like the Macbeths absolutely do. So that just needs to really set the scene for you. You're growing up in a world of like stained glass windows and sort of seeing stories and characters, or say characters, but these are real life people from the Bible brought to life in these images. And again, reading the Bible, not necessarily reading it quite literally, because many people at this time were unable to read, but you would have heard the Bible stories being read to you in sections in church, and singing hymns as well. So all of these things would really sort of have a massive guiding influence on your life. So let's talk firstly then, and I should have said at the top of this video, be ready to make notes. If you haven't done so already, pause this video now quickly, go and get yourself some paper and pen, and be ready to do some writing here, because these are the important contextual bits. The first one is, as the title suggests to you, the great chain of being. And I've tried to summarise it down into a medieval belief. Now, medieval is like this sort of Middle Ages type of time we're talking about. The medieval belief that there is a hierarchy for all things decreed from God. A hierarchy where you place things in an order, often an order of importance. And the word there in that first bullet point, decreed, means it comes from God. He has set it down. So this idea that this chain of being, that life has been ordered in a certain way, and that has been ordered by God. As I've put on the second bullet point, everything has its place. God is at the very top of this hierarchy, as you might be able to work out from the illustration on the right there. Then beneath him is the king, the highest person on earth. And then beneath that there are various other levels. You could sort of subdivide each of the levels as well, because not every single human being would have been seen as important as each other. People who were vicars and the clergy and bishops would have been more important than your common working man, but within the hierarchy it can be broken down. And at the very bottom you move down through animal life, which can be broken down into more and less important, plant life, and then finally things like the minerals, the rocks and the stones, and just the seemingly very unimportant things. But as I've put on the third bullet point, it reflects an order that you have been placed into by God. You have been born into this because God has guided your birth and guided your upbringing, and therefore you are in the right place. The final bullet point is really important here. To step out of your place would be to break God's plan, and that would be seen as a very, very bad thing. Heresy, in fact, is a good word for it. Heresy. Look it up if you've never heard that word and just be really confident. Heresy. If you have more time needed, then pause this video and just take time to write down some of the notes on the screen there. Try and copy down some of the things I'm telling you as well as just what's written there as well. And go off and do some of your own research, guys. That will really sort of support you in better understanding these things. That is the illustration on the right there is one version. This is a simplified version, sort of taken from, I think it's a different language, possibly Latin, I can see there in the background. But anyway, with the writing on the right-hand side, simplifying it down, the idea of like these levels. Now, the king would sit just beneath heaven at the top of the hierarchy for humanity. But yeah, it gives you an idea of just things being placed into an order. And with a similar idea linking to that, it's a separate title on your page though, is the divine right of kings. Now if I break that down into the different words, so divine means coming from God, if something is divine. The right is like your entitlement, what you are allowed and sort of given, it is yours. You have a right to it, and kings hopefully speaks for itself. It would have worked for queens as well. And my first bullet point says, the belief that God has control over who becomes the next monarch. Monarch being another word for king or queen, a really good word to try and get yourself using is monarch. Because, second bullet point, God controls the monarch's children being born, and therefore chooses who the successor is. It's in God's hands. It isn't like the king is able to choose freely and say like, yeah, okay, I'd like that person over there to become king or queen. Their children, and it would often be the eldest male if there was a male child, would automatically inherit the throne, but that's God's choice because God has created that child from the king and queen. And I just wanted to quote there for you as well, a quote I found on the internet which comes from James I, who was the king at the time that Macbeth was performed. And he said, the state of monarchy, so king or queen, is the most supreme thing upon earth, which means it's the most important. For kings are not only God's lieutenants upon earth and sit upon God's throne, but even by God himself they are called gods. So it really does sort of put the idea of monarchy, that king and queen is far above everybody else on the planet and in the country. Now it's about linking it to Macbeth, because all of these ideas are well and good, and hopefully you've written down some notes there, but it's no good just trying to sort of throw that in. It's like, okay, you might be asking, well, how does that link to Macbeth? So let me make those links, and again, be ready to make some notes here. Because by murdering King Duncan, Macbeth and also Lady Macbeth, because she is involved in planning that murder, so the Macbeths are breaking the chain of being, because they are rising above the station they've been chosen by God. Macbeth is a Thane. He has become Thane because of the king's wishes, and was because his father was a Thane. That's passed on to Macbeth. That is all sort of created by God. So murdering God and trying to become king is rising above this and stepping outside of the chain of being. My second bullet point also puts the murder of the king also directly, and here's a good word for you, it violates God's choice of the monarch. We heard about the divine right of king. Well, Macbeth murdering the king and then stepping into that role is basically, yeah, again, breaking this idea of the divine right of kings. The third bullet point is really important because this is what Shakespeare is trying to teach us and show us. The punishment that can be seen by the audience is the suffering of the Macbeths, I should say, because Lady Macbeth can't sleep. Macbeth also talks about being unable to sleep. They both become increasingly paranoid. That's something else they suffer from as well. And ultimately, she loses her mind, is visualizing the blood on her hands. He becomes more and more bloodthirsty and is ultimately beheaded, killed. And then the crown rightly returns to Malcolm, who was King Duncan's son, at the very end of the play. So it almost sort of sews itself up nicely. But you can see the punishments on the Macbeth. And the play, therefore, and here's the other thing you want to write down, the play, therefore, acts as a warning to others in the audience. It shows what will happen to those who break God's wishes, who go against God's ideas and his ideals. And that's what you see happen with the Macbeths. And therefore, as I said, the play is directly acting as a warning. Now, it'll be up to you, depends on the question you get in the exam, but it'll be up to you to try and feed those sorts of ideas into your work. And if you do that cleverly and successfully, then I promise you, you will be gaining more marks, because that shows a deeper understanding of the play than somebody who just talks about Macbeth kills the king and becomes king, but he ultimately dies at the end. And it just doesn't show the same understanding as what we've talked about. So finally then, what I'd like you to do is pause this slide and have a go at those questions, because they will test your understanding. All of those answers can be found within the video that I've just gone through with you and that you've just listened to. So have a go at writing those down somewhere, and if you're uncertain of any of the answers, double back to bits of the video and you will be able to find out the answers yourself. And also, top level students will go off after this video and do a little bit of research, those impressive students. So make sure you're an impressive student. Go off and find out something, and then go back to your English class and impress your English teacher with knowledge that you didn't have before. I shall say thank you very much at this point for listening to this video up until here. Check out some of the other videos on the channel. There's all sorts going through all the different things that you will need for Macbeth, and I'll be adding videos over time as well, so do keep checking back. Above all, thanks very much for listening all the way through. Good luck when it comes to your exams, and goodbye.